Hello everyone, my name is Lauren Boylan and this presentation is on coaching, disciplining, and terminating staff. The learning objectives of this presentation are to identify effective coaching strategies, contrast differences between feedback and coaching, discuss addressing performance issues with confrontation, explain the concept of progressive discipline, and identify components for termination. So coaching, what is it? It is an interactive and interpersonal process. It facilitates meaningful conversations to motivate change. It allows the nurse to learn and change their behavior. And keys to successful coaching include a timely and ongoing process. Feedback should be given as close to the event or observation of an error as possible. Coaching is given frequently throughout the year, not just one time and then 5 years elapse and you have another coaching episode. Coaching should always be goal referenced. Feedback should be linked to a behavioral goal and include steps on how to achieve the goal and give the staff member information and time to achieve that goal. Coaching is always constructive and positive. Feedback should not be limited to constructive feedback that addresses performance issues, but should also give feedback through praise when the employee does something well. Coaching is always tangible and transparent. And coaching always should be respectful, encourage reflection, and be carried out in a private setting. There are 3 essentials that are required by the nurse receiving the coaching in order for the coaching to be taken seriously and to be effective. These essentials include the nurse being ready, willing, and able. By being ready, the nurse is psychologically prepared to accept the coaching. By willing, the nurse must be open to the process and interested and willing to make that change. They also need to be willing to improve their own personal performance. And by being able, the nurse must be capable of change and have previously demonstrated the right aptitude of learning to be able to learn a new process. Feedback. It's not exactly the same thing as coaching. Feedback focuses on past behaviors, whereas coaching is future forward. Feedback assesses performance against a current performance or policy standard, whereas coaching develops and improves performance in a current situation as well as in future situations. Feedback is constructive with consequences, whereas with coaching, remediation occurs through developing their current skill set. Feedback is positive with rewards, but coaching includes career advancement and encourages the person to continue their education. So therefore, feedback and coaching are not exactly the same thing. However, the main difference between feedback and coaching is that feedback with coaching does result in behavior modification and leads to an overall improvement in the employee's performance. So the key is to pair the two together to get the outcome that is desired. Confronting behavioral issues. This is a hard situation in any place, whether it's in the workforce or in your personal life. Confrontation puts the nurse on high alert, makes them aware that they're doing something that is wrong or something that needs to change. Confrontation is a more serious level of interaction between a manager and a nurse. Confrontation about behavior must be documented. And it's always important to remember that confrontation is systematic, it is not sympathetic. So you should never feel sorry for needing to confront a peer or a manager or an individual in the workforce about a behavior that is not tolerable because of your personal feelings or concerns for their personal feelings and concerns. Disciplinary action. Discipline is a progressive process. It is generally dictated by organizational policies and procedures. Disciplinary action is a consequence of employee behavior, and attitudinal considerations of the nurse play an integral role in the action plan. Studies have shown that nurses who demonstrate a positive attitude are willing to reflect on their own performance and admit their own wrongdoing, oftentimes do not receive repeated offenses in the disciplinary process, compared to nurses that are unwilling to look at their performance and have a negative attitude and become defensive when they are confronted about a situation. Progressive discipline is a formal process of increasing disciplinary action. Each stage of the process is documented. The like treatment for the same policy violation applies to all employees. So an employee that is late 3 times in a row that gets a verbal warning is the same standard for all the other employees that are late 3 times. They should all be receiving a verbal warning at that time. The disciplinary process includes a verbal warning, which is still documented in writing, a written warning, then a suspension, and then unfortunately termination is the last step of the process. Here's a short video to view on delivering a verbal warning. I thought this video was pretty short and to the point and had some good pointers in it. So we click the link, we can view this.
How to deliver a verbal warning. As a supervisor or manager, you must be able to conduct employee meetings, both positive and negative. If you conduct a verbal warning in an effective manner, the employee may leave the meeting feeling you are giving them a chance to correct behavior that could hold them back from progressing with the company. Follow these steps. First, prepare in advance. Document the problem and how the employee's action or behavior differs from the company's standards. Ask yourself, is the employee aware of the company standards? Is there any written documentation which shows the employee is aware of the standard, such as an employment handbook acknowledgement? Are there any mitigating factors such as business conditions, conflicting directions? Then review employee file for prior documentation, i.e. performance appraisals or other documentation. Second, establish an uninterrupted time and place for the meeting. Make sure you conduct the meeting in private, away from the eyes of other coworkers. Third, get right to the point, but ask questions in order to encourage the employee to provide an explanation or additional information. Let the employee talk about what is occurring or why performance isn't meeting standards. This will help structure the next part of your discussion. Fourth, obtain agreement about how performance is going to improve. Reiterate the employee's importance to the team, and then clarify your expectations that there is no confusion on the part of the employee. And finally, following up with an email. After your conversation, follow up with a summary of the discussion in an email and send to the employee. Ask them to confirm they received and are of the same understanding. Then print and place in the employee's file. If it appears the employee is not serious about improving, you must take a firmer tone and say something like, "This is important because if you don't improve, it could lead to termination. At this point, I'm giving you a verbal warning which will be placed in your personnel file." If the conversation has been positive, you can say, "I'm glad we had this discussion because I feel confident that you will be able to meet expectations going forward." Visit us at turnkeydoc.com to download a library of human resources forms and
And lastly, termination. Termination is the final process that ends employment. It can have emotional, legal, and financial consequences. Always have a second individual, if not more individuals, present with you during the process. Ideally, an individual from human resources would be the best individual fit to be there during the termination process, and always complete the necessary preparation for termination. With that being said, you want to make sure you have reviewed the employee's file. You can ask yourself, did you give the employee on the unit feedback on a regular basis? Have you ever offered them remediation or coaching to address performance issues? Are you being consistent in the application of performance standards against all other employees who are in like situations? You might want to consider how the employee may challenge the termination and prepare yourself for that challenge. So if you feel this person may become aggressive or physical or threatening during this 5 to 15-minute conversation, you may want to have security present or on standby to keep everybody safe. And lastly, you want to make sure your supervisor is aware of and behind your decision to terminate this employee, as well as human resources. It's important that everything is documented in writing and that all the appropriate channels have been utilized before getting to this point in case it should become a legal case in the court of law. Here's a video that you can click the link below to view on tips on terminating an employee.
So you have to fire someone. Don't worry, you are not alone. Inevitably, every business has to terminate an employee at one time or another. Remember, terminating an employee is likely the most stressful and definitive act possible in the workplace. For some people, being terminated can be as stressful as a death in the family and divorce. It is stressful for you, for the employee, and for those around you. Here are a few tips to help you. Tip number 1. If the employee is surprised by the termination, you have done something wrong. Progressive discipline is a great way to keep everyone on the same page. Make sure you have all your backup data in place before you meet with the employee, such as emails or previous write-ups. Tip number 2, have another person present during the actual termination. Their primary purpose for being there is to observe and document the proceedings. Tip number 3, keep the termination meeting between 5 and 15 minutes in the early to late afternoon. Try to hold the termination meeting at a time and location that will not parade the employee through the office. Tip number 4, remember the purpose of the meeting is to inform the employee of the decision, not to debate it or review it. If the employee wants to debate the decision, ask them to send you an email after they have thought it over for a day or so. Tip number 5, have a detailed plan in place for what will happen after the interview. In most cases, you may want to have someone escort them to gather their belongings. Tip number 6, try to anticipate any questions and prepare your answers. Then think of any crazy questions or behaviors you might get. Going through possible scenarios will help you feel more comfortable facing the situation. Here are some examples. They start to cry. The employee does not understand. They demand to talk to someone else. The employee stands up or starts to walk around. You feel threatened. The employee refuses to leave. Tip number 7, make sure all the paperwork involved with the termination is ready and written in plain, understandable language. You can visit www.turnkeydoc.com to download not only a
And to summarize this presentation, it is important to remember coaching is an interactive process that enables a positive change in behavior. For coaching to be effective, the nurse must be ready, willing, and able to receive feedback. Feedback with coaching results in behavior modification and leads to an improvement in performance. Think systematic in regards to confrontation rather than sympathetic. And lastly, progressive discipline includes a verbal warning, written warning, suspension, and ultimately termination. This concludes my presentation, and I hope that you are able to better understand the coaching, disciplining, and termination process for all employees. Thank you.